my skin is brown, my mom was white. And so whenever we would have school functions or, little kids would make fun of me, like, that's not your real mom, or, they'd make fun of my name, Nazi. It means cute in Farsi, but in English, it sounds like Nazi. And so they would, call my dad Hitler. And it was awful. But the culture is so amazing and it's so rich. And as an adult, that I'm so grateful for the way that my life has unfolded and my horizons have been broadened, and I've been able to see how other people live, which I think gives me a lot of perspective as a journalist.
We get stopped by TSA and they ask my parents, if you don't mind me asking, how much money are you guys taking over to Iran? And, this is while everyone's passing by us to get onto the plane. That plane is actively boarding. And so my mom goes, like 8, 9, whatever the figure was, that we were taking over there. And so the guy goes, do you mind if we count it? My mom, she gets really nervous around like these authority figures. Of course, like, yeah, you can count it. But it's just a very precarious situation to be in because we are literally in the airport gate, like boarding the plane. And this guy takes the bag out, get whatever envelope my mom had the money in, and on the ground, as people are passing by us, starts just counting the money one by one to make sure it's accurate.
Every time there's a mass shooting or a bombing or some sort of catastrophic, criminal kind of crime event in the United States where a lot of people are killed, I almost feel like I hold my breath from the moment the breaking news headline comes on to the moment I can see a picture of the suspect or find out a name. And I hold my breath thinking, please don't let it be a Muslim name, someone from a Muslim background, or, in particular with my background in Afghan, someone from Afghanistan. And there's this almost a weird sense of relief when it is not, because this just adds to, I think, the discrimination that Muslim people feel in the United States.
I think it is very hard when you are, like me, one small part of a big news organization. And if you are not supported by the people around you who make direct decisions about what goes on the air, absolutely, I can understand how you would find yourself feeling like, I am the only one here who has a story to tell and isn't able to get that news out. So anger, absolutely, I can understand it.
We, as the citizens of Afghanistan, had to leave our country because there was no any other option in the ground. The only option in the ground was to leave and to be discriminated, to be eliminated, or to be killed. So to leave Afghanistan and to migrate was the only option available, not only for me, but for thousands and thousands of other young Afghan individuals.
I had the opportunity to go to Greece and Italy to really speak to some of these people who are refugees coming from Syria and different parts of the Middle East. And although I was not able to fully understand the language, I did know and I could understand the pain and the journey that they went through.
I can affect the words that I use to tell the stories that this whole newsroom has agreed that need to be told. So I make the impact that way. And again, in the stories that I pitch, the stories that I produce, and the live guests that I book on the air, I have power to do that. I have privilege to do that. And if I waste that, then I'm taking us in the wrong direction or standing still, both of which are not good.
It's common practice, I feel like, to group all our cultures in together, but like Persian is very different from Arabs. And so it is frustrating when you see us getting clumped in with these stereotypes. And it's also unfair to my Arab friends, my Arab colleagues, very unfair to them as well. Just when you see something, an incident like a bombing occur on television, and the first thing, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's even on the news, like you will hear people, this could be terrorism, this could be international terrorism, it could be this. That's always the first idea that's kind of floated around.
Yes, Ukraine is important, but let's not forget Afghanistan. Let's not forget Syria. Let's not forget Iraq. Let's not forget other countries which they are in need. If you leave Afghanistan, for example, in the hands of the Taliban, so you would accept something which is going to be very dangerous to the world.
If journalism is supposed to be the representation of our communities and the public, then we need to be critical. If we're supposed to also be critical of of government and outside forces, we should turn that lens onto ourselves and be critical internally as well, and look at how we can make our newsrooms more representative and diverse.
Ramadan Mubarak to our Muslim friends and viewers and members of the Academy, and welcome everyone. I'm Bob Rucker, a member of the Board of Governors and chair of the Diversity Committee for the San Francisco and NorCal chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. Our special monthly series, Diversity, Let's Really Talk About It, continues today with new insights from a group of distinguished journalists whose unique lives and careers are known for celebrating the importance of truth-telling and connecting with audiences in their proud cultural communities. Now, most of the incredible professionals you just heard from are either Muslim, Christian, or have family ties to Afghanistan, Iran, Armenia, or other countries in the Middle East and Central Asia. Two of us here today are also from the Mexican and African-American communities. We're all coming together to model what happens in newsrooms where we express curiosity and learn from one another's life experiences. Because in journalism, we all believe by opening up dialogues with anyone and asking important and insightful questions, we discover common ground, which inspires good storytelling, which resonates with the people in the communities we serve. Unfortunately, today we will also discuss all too often some of our problems, those persistent fears, mistrust, intrusive inquiries and actions, or concerns with just not being heard in newsroom decision-making. Since diversity is now essential in broadcasting, all levels, we will explore how some ideas and creative approaches could be considered more for their timely community value and impact. If we were hired to share a breadth of knowledge which fosters community trust and connections, how could our experiences with faith, heritage, and historic traditions be better utilized in news operations to attract more viewers and listeners? Since the National Academy's chapter diversity series debuted in February, we had some remarkable reactions to our interactions between broadcast professionals from a wide range of jobs in the industry. During Black History Month, we candidly talked about being personally affected by the brutal killing of George Floyd and how those powerful protests worldwide touched all our lives and inspired new outreach in broadcasting. In March, we celebrated Women's History Month with an extraordinary group of accomplished women professionals from different generations and cultures who acknowledged publicly the shocking early history of sexual harassment and limited career advancement in TV newsrooms. But in that session, we also confirmed major changes have taken place over time, especially in station management hiring, where women more and more now hold influential decision-making positions on the highest levels. So over the next hour, we will again explore, and with the same amount of candor and curiosity, the joys and the sense of lifetime fulfillment as media professionals and journalists, as well as those very difficult realities we've faced involving social biases, prejudice, and in a few cases, even life-threatening circumstances. We invite our audience who are watching live on YouTube and Facebook to send us questions for the program. And before we finish, I'll also give you a preview of our thinking about future culture-related programs. This year, we invite our Academy members to participate more, add your voices and experiences, and help us expand this diversity learning opportunity to include everyone. Now, each month, we start these interactions with self-introductions. In a moment, we'll go around and each participant is asked to briefly tell their name, their current job and location, and describe their unique cultural identities. For example, I'm that African-American I referred to earlier, who's now retired and has worked in small and major market TV news and as a national correspondent for CNN. I'm also active in the Catholic Church community and a member of the LGBT community. My favorite diversity-related stories are those about disabilities especially people born with Down syndrome, like my younger sister. Next week, she turns 66, but unfortunately, she has Alzheimer's disease. So my husband and I take care of her here at home, which is our custom and tradition for family elders. Okay, that's my story. Panel, it's your turn. Nazy, I want to introduce you next. Go ahead, tell us about you.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate that you're holding these discussions, and I'm so grateful to be invited to take part in one. My name is Nazy Javid. I am a morning news anchor and assistant news director at KRCR News Channel 7. It's the ABC affiliate in Redding, California. I just recently came from Eureka, where I was a news director and evening anchor there for several years. And I started my reporting career with the Bay Area's TV 50 KFTY in Santa Rosa. I have 4 bonus kids who are amazing. 3 are triplet boys and 2 who are awesomely autistic. And so you might see them pop in if you do, just so you know. And then I have a daughter who's 16, and I've got a husband who is a police sergeant with the Eureka Police Department. And I got a little dog named Barbie who might be running through here, a little tiny Chihuahua. But I love being a journalist, and I'm super grateful to be here. Thank you for the invite, Bob.
Thank you. Go ahead, Keanu.
My name is Keanu Haghighi. I'm a graphics producer over at ESPN here in lovely Bristol, Connecticut, the first sunny day we've gotten since October. I was a student of Bob's. I was a student at San Jose State studying journalism, also a student of Halima's, who you'll see later in the program. And so I've been over at ESPN for about a year now. Before that, I was at NBC Sports. I was an intern at CNN, back at NBC Sports before they were that, CSN. So I've been in the industry for about 4 or 5 years now. So excited to be here.
Halima?
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. I'm Halima Kazem-Stojanovic. I'm an investigative journalist and filmmaker and a professor of journalism and human rights at San Jose State University. I've been there for almost 10 years. Before that, I spent over 10 years in Afghanistan reporting for various news outlets, including Christian Science Monitor, the LA Times, and a variety of news organizations. It is a pleasure to be here with Bob, with everybody. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you here with us. And Omar, I hope your audio and signal is good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Bob. Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Omar Perez. I am a digital reporter and producer here in the San Francisco Bay Area with KRON 4. I've been with them for a couple years now. And before that, I was down in Bakersfield working for KGET and Telemundo, working as a bilingual reporter, covering a little bit of everything down there. I'm Mexican-American, and I am from San Diego, California. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Glad to have you on board. And I've always wanted to say this. Let's go overseas now to our guest, Zia. Go for it.
Hello, good morning, America, and good evening, Berlin, and good evening, Afghanistan. My name is Ahmad Zia Ferozpur. I come from Afghanistan. Currently, I work as a radio journalist for Volant Media, Afghanistan International Radio, which the media was established right after the collapse of Afghanistan by the hands of the Taliban. Before that, I work in different capacities in journalism industry and communications, and as well as in the government affairs. I work for the United Nations in Afghanistan. I contributed with the NATO mission in Afghanistan, and I also was a assistant lecturer for Afghanistan universities, particularly in Balkh. And I had the pleasure to be a student of Bob Rocker and Halima Kazem.
Well, it's great to have you back. It's good to see you again, and we'll certainly be coming back to talk. And if you missed it earlier, Ramadan Mubarak. I'm very happy to say that to you and all our Muslim friends. Thank you all for being here. And one of our other participants you saw in the open was Gasia Mikaelian, TV news anchor for Mornings on 2 at KTVU in Oakland, here in the Bay Area. Gasia is Armenian American and talks on the air about her enjoyment of traditions in her culture, food, celebrations, and enjoys going to Armenian Christian church services. Now, she was unable to join us live today, but Gasia recorded some additional comments in advance, and we're going to share those with you throughout the program. All right, folks, let's get that talk in here. And I want to start with the basic question. We all love what we do. I enjoyed my journalism career in television, but what were the circumstances in each of your lives which motivated you to become journalists? And how does the profession continue to excite your mind? Halima, let me start with you.
So I think I probably tell my students this quite often is I knew at the age of 10 that I wanted to be a journalist. I knew very early. And what made me want to be a journalist is war and injustice, unfortunately. I was born 6 months before the Soviet coup in Afghanistan in the 70s. My life was affected from very early on in extreme ways. And the news was where my parents would go to be informed in so many different places we were in our journeys. And I realized very early on how important news was to people. And that was a sense of relief that I had when I would listen to the news. And also injustice. My family faced a lot of injustice. Afghans today are seeing and experiencing injustice. And part of telling the truth and part of storytelling in news is finding that truth. And it gives me that release as well. And it helps me feel like I'm involved.
Very good. And again, we apologize for some of the technical challenges we're experiencing. Hopefully we can get those cleared up as we go along. Nazy, let me ask you to join that conversation. What got you motivated?
You know, it's so interesting. That's a great question, because I really didn't know initially when I was in college. We didn't have a journalism program. So I was studying pre-law, political science, and communications, trying to figure out whether I wanted to go to law school, what exactly I wanted to do with my life. And I was in my apartment one day. It was my sophomore year in college, and I came out. I still remember exactly where I was, like most of us do. And I had a towel wrapped around my head. I was just kind of doing stuff in my apartment, and I immediately heard the voice of urgency on the television screen, which drew me in. And it was Ashley Banfield, and she was reporting from Ground Zero, and the plane had just hit the tower, and then the other plane came and hit the other tower. And I knew in that moment what an important, critical job it was as a journalist to be delivering what would be life-saving information for people in the area to get out. But I didn't, over time, as the story unfolded, and I realized what an incredible responsibility it is to report on a story like that was something that I wanted to do. And as you saw, over time, I started realizing like there weren't that many reporters and anchors of Middle Eastern descent reporting on this story that I saw in mainstream media. And so that kind of inspired me. And then I took an internship in Washington, D.C., and the rest is history. But it was that awful attack that kind of sparked my interest in this field.
Very good, Nazy. Thank you so much. And, you know, Keanu, let's bring you in now, because you have the dream job that so many young folks in college want and people in our industry want. You work at ESPN, you're doing sports, but what really gave you the bug all at the very beginning?
It started from a really young age, I'd have to say. Growing up, every morning, 7 in the morning, first run of SportsCenter came on, and I'd be watching it. And just the passion and love for sports I've had since I was a young kid. And when I realized that, you know, I'm not going to make it into professional sports, unfortunately, 5'8", 170 doesn't do it in many sports. I decided to go on the next best thing, you know, TV. Let's give it a shot. And just as a lot of people who first started, they wanted to be on air, they wanted to be on camera. So did I. And then once I really started learning about the whole industry in general, I really got into the production side of things. And so that's how I shifted over to production. And I've been doing production since I entered the industry professionally. So it's been a lot of fun. It's really cool seeing the SportsCenter set every day, driving in ESPN, kind of seeing the place you kind of dreamed about as a kid.
Very good, Keanu. And again, I love what the internet is doing to you. It's turning you into an artistic expression as you talk. But we heard you.
It's putting me through it.
We thank you for it. And talk to me a little bit now, Omar. You were telling me when we talked earlier that your mother loved your first name and that's how you got it. And so many people think that you are from Middle Eastern or Arab culture. But I really want to know, what got you into journalism?
Yeah, that's right, Bob. It's funny you say that. My name, you know, just coincidentally happens to be a name that is very, very popular from my understanding in the Middle East and from a lot of people that I actually know. But I got my first start in journalism really was at the height of the elections in 2016. I actually was also a student of Halima and Bob's. And in doing so, I remember, you know, stepping into Bob's office and he let me know at the time that the Latino vote, which is, I identified myself as a Latino Spanish speaking male, it really inspired me to, really understand the power that journalism has, especially in my community. I know I grew up with my mom watching Telemundo, Univision, where, they really, really tuned in into those, the news stations to learn what's happening in our community. And so for me, it really happened at the start of the elections. And then soon after the elections happened, I actually went overseas with Halima, where we did a documentary on the refugee crisis that is happening over there on the other side of the world. And it just ignited that interest of my upbringing, which I grew up with immigrant parents. And so I really understood at that point, having traveled abroad and overseas, that, there's a lot of people who deal with the same thing, who may not have the same culture or even the same language, but there's a lot of similarities there. And so I believe that is something that still excites me now with the industry. And, I really find it a privilege to be able to do what I do now.
Well, again, I love the enthusiasm. That's exactly what most of us are feeling. And Zia Ferozpur, let me bring you in now and talk about, you grew up in Afghanistan. You wanted to be a journalist. You came to the United States to study at San Jose State how we do American-style freedom of speech journalism. And then you had hoped the future would be different for your country. Talk to us a little bit about how you're feeling now.
Well, first of all, I took the decision to be a journalist when the Taliban for the first time occupied my country back in the 90s. And those days, Afghanistan was the country of no voice, no picture. And it was difficult for people to access to the right information. I remember it was so hard for us, especially I was a kid, but my father with so many struggles, trying to find a way to listen to the BBC radio, listen to the Voice of America, and to listen to other radio stations to get the right information. So from that time, I decided to be a journalist and to raise the voice of my country and to get the right information to the right people. However, it is not very easy in the country, especially after the Taliban took the country again for the second time, to be a journalist, because to be a journalist is a challenging job. You have to take the risk in order to put yourself in the shoes of a journalist. But of course, you pointed out correctly that I had the pleasure to be at the University of San Jose back in the days during the 2012. This was a great opportunity for me to explore the journalism of this style of journalism which is conducted in the United States of America. And I took the knowledge back to the country of my origin in Afghanistan. However, I'm now in Berlin, and I took that knowledge to the class, to the students of Afghanistan, and to share the knowledge to the Afghan students who are now still in an uncertain situation. Some have evacuated Afghanistan, some are remained in the circumstances of fear and uncertain.
And I love the fact that you are still trying with another company in Germany, a company that's based in England, I understand, to continue to talk to the people of Afghanistan about the truth of what's going on in your country. Is that risky for you as well?
This is absolutely one of the riskiest job, Bob, which I'm taking now, because I jeopardize by this job the security of my independence, those of my parents and brothers and sisters, and all of my relatives and the former colleagues and classmates. But one has to take this risk. One has to be very courageful. One has to lead something. So when Afghanistan was for the second time collapsed in the hands of the Taliban in 2021, this Volant media was established station in the United Kingdom, and I had the offer to work as a radio journalist. Nowadays, the way I approach to Afghanistan is more critical, because I'm usually covering human rights violations, criminals activities, the corruption, the way that the Taliban are violating the women's right, the children's right. So this is risky, absolutely.
Very good. And Halima, if you could talk to us a little bit more about your international reporting. You've traveled to Afghanistan and around the world. Talk about some of the things you've experienced.
So reporting in Afghanistan for as long as I did, for years, and living there was a privilege. It is a special country and very, very dangerous for journalists. And it has been a place where I've learned some of my biggest lessons in reporting and what it means to report, and also had some of my most dangerous moments, being Afghan-American, being this dual identity, and being passing through places with a U.S. passport and an Afghan passport. And as Zia says, it is critical. The kind of information that's needed in Afghanistan on a daily basis is critical, and everyone who works there puts their lives at risk every day, even if it was during the time when the U.S. was still in Afghanistan. And today, the time is very critical. As a reporter traveling to different countries and reporting, that has been one of the best parts of my experience. And I enjoy sharing that with my students, and I enjoy taking students to places like when we took Omar's student group to Greece and Italy, into the refugee camps. I take my international experiences and I infuse them into the classroom to give students that opportunity to understand what it's like to report in different places like Afghanistan.
That's a fantastic learning opportunity. Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. 9/11 comes to mind. I think I want to talk about that here and bring Gasia into the conversation. Most of us will never forget the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York. Gasia Mikaelian said she was anchoring in TV news in San Diego that day. And she says that story not only changed America, it also created opportunities for our colleagues here at home in newsrooms to ask more insightful questions and learn from each other. Take a look.
We were lucky that we had a Muslim American reporter in our newsroom at the time. And she and I, after that day, had a series of conversations about, well, so when we say God, let's talk about what that means. Or, when we talk about jihad, what does that mean? And so she was a great help to me personally and to everyone in the newsroom. However, she shouldered much of the burden of teaching all of us about her culture, her religion. And I often think wow, what would it have been without her in that newsroom?
Very good insight. And Nazy, if I may ask you, how did you feel as a journalist working at that time?
Well, gosh, so at that time, I was just starting my career. In fact, I was an intern. I took an internship with Tribune Broadcasting in Washington, D.C., and it was a 3-tiered internship at the White House, the Pentagon, and the Capitol. And so we got to attend a lot of events post 9/11 in which, at that time, now Muslim Americans had to justify themselves. And there was a fear that, all of us were criminals. And, it was crazy because I had a colleague who was an intern with me. I'm Iranian and she is also Middle Eastern. She's Arab. And we both were at dinner with the president. It was President Bush at the time. And we're outside of the event. And we had a small interaction with a cab. We had ordered a cab to come pick us up. And we walked up to the cab to ask a question if that was our cab that we called. And the military, the Metropolitan Police came up to us and immediately assumed that we were a threat or a danger and started questioning us and told us that we couldn't go and ask these cabs questions directly. And we were baffled. It didn't make any sense. And we asked back, what is this about? We're just trying to ask a question to see if that's our cab. And they immediately handcuffed us together like we were a danger to people outside of this dinner with the president. And that was my experience. I couldn't put together that this is a reality now. This is a post 9/11 reality where hate crimes are increasing and people who are Muslim or perceived to be Muslim are now seen in a different light. I mean, it was a really difficult time to be Persian and it is, and I saw change over the years. And then, and then we come back and we have, travel ban and there's so many things that have come out throughout the media that have had a direct impact on me and my loved ones and my family. And it just baffles me today that we're still going back to the same problems.
It is baffling. And Keanu, she reminds me that way back when you were in my class, you just stopped everybody with your story of, as a child, traveling with your family back to Iran to see your family, to engage them in a very innocent and very loving way, and yet TSA got in the middle of it. You want to say any more about that?
Yeah, we briefly touched on the cold open. It was an interesting experience to say the least. We were just going to Iran. I believe it was my second time going to Iran. I was about 12, 13 years old. We're just flying, I believe, from like Los Angeles and doing our 2-3 long flights to get over there. And so it was in, I believe, LA. We get past TSA, everything's fine. We're getting ready to get on this long flight to go to Iran. And we get stopped as the plane is boarding. And it was a little confusing at the time. Like, that's interesting. That's a little weird. And so as everyone's boarding, they stop us. They tell us, listen, how much money are you guys taking over to Iran? A little weird question to ask as we're boarding the plane. My parents answer the question. And then they ask, can we count that money? Like, sure, you can. Or where are we going? They just took the bag on the ground as everyone was boarding on the plane, one by one, counting the bills as everyone's looking at us like, what's going on with these people? Like, are they counting their money in the gate? And so it's just a really weird experience. And I remember being 12, 13 years old at the time thinking, this isn't normal. I don't ever remember this happening. And so that's really stuck with me over the years. And I remember just sharing that story in your class and people being pretty surprised about it.
Yeah, most people thought, come on, TSA, this is at that point a time in your life when we should be more aware than it seemed to be demonstrated. And Omar, you and I have talked a lot about a variety of issues. I like the fact that you had a chance to go with Halima overseas and meet other cultures. But you and I are from different cultures, I mentioned in the open. And you and I can relate to some of the things we've been hearing from our friends, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, Bob, I totally agree. I know at least journalistic, in my journalism career, I've gone to, down at the border, down in Tijuana, where I was doing a report on the migrant caravan that was happening, I believe, in the winter of 2019, going into 2020. And I remember vividly having to go through, so many checkpoints. Being a journalist, it's, very dangerous in Mexico to be a journalist. And it really reminded me when I went abroad with Halima, where we went to Greece and Italy, where I actually got stopped quite a few times. And I remember vividly being very upset about it, asking, why am I the one being stopped? Our whole group basically got to go, but I was the one being stopped. And as I realized, the color of my skin, I did have a little bit of a beard, I guess, at the time. So it was really, reminiscent of the things that I had to go through when I was, like I said, reporting on in Tijuana, although they may be different, places around the world, but the dangers are still, very much there. And I can absolutely relate to, having fear, for your life, for your security, and, being frisked. Like I said, I grew up in San Diego, so I would go, down to Tijuana every so often. And, still some of those same things, still exist in a lot of other countries as well.
Absolutely. And let me bring back Zia from Germany. Zia, we've talked a little bit about stereotypes, some of the challenges that are presented in worldview about Muslims and people from Middle Eastern cultures. From your perspective, growing up in Central Europe or Central Asia, what would you suggest is the reasons behind this perpetuated stereotyping about the culture?
Well, Bob, thank you for this important question. First of all, we have to admit that in so many cases in the globe, but especially in the West, it seems to feature the Muslim community constantly a little bit in a negative way. Well, I agree there are issues with the Muslim communities in terms of terrorism, in terms of radicalization, but that's not all the Muslims in the world. So the portrait of this negative image of Islam takes place, by some media, intentionally by some media for a purpose. And I think that narration really has to be changed. And the global Muslims have to also, on the other hand, represent their cultures in a softer way. And they should take all these opportunities identify their values and their cultures. So when we talk about, for example, Islam as a case, so Islam itself has so many pros as well. So let's take Ramadan as an example. For example, Ramadan is an opportunity where people can worship and where people can peace with themselves first. So when we talk about Ramadan, that doesn't mean only to stop and avoid eating and drinking, but it also means to have a peace in your side, to have peace around yourself, and to give peace to the world. So that has to also be changed from the Muslim community and to give a new cookie to the world. So the world has to really know the Muslim communities, that they are not only the terrorists, but they're also doctors, they're engineers, they're the scientists, they're writers, they're footballers, they're, for example, journalists, they're with different capacities and different careers, and then have to be engaged with the perception that has the Western community now. So as in the beginning of this talk, it was mentioned that in the West there is a culture nowadays, unfortunately, when there is a bomb blast, when there is an attack, so they are naturally related to the Muslim community. That is right, actually, in some cases, but it's not right in all the cases. Look at the Ukraine issue. For example, Ukraine is a fight and a war of non-Muslims between the two countries, but we have to not really blame all the time the Muslim communities. This is very sorry that this image was built, as I mentioned, for a purpose or not for a purpose, but one has to change it by giving the new perception to the world.
I would imagine. And I'm going to invite the entire panel now to jump in. Don't wait for me to call on you. But I'm curious about these stereotypes. I've seen them as a journalist. I've certainly tried not to engage in those. But when we get back to talking about our newsrooms, I wonder sometimes, are you being listened to? Are your ideas being ranked as important enough to compete with the stories of the day? Let's take it into that zone and see what your thoughts about it. Nazy, you have that wonderful look on your face that you might have something to say.
Well, I'm just thinking we don't have that because I'm leading the newsroom. So I'm able to share that perspective, but I wonder for the newsrooms that don't have that balance. I mean, we know that the portrayal of Muslims in the Western media changed dramatically after 9/11, and there's this heightened fear of violence that could be committed by Muslims. And when you hear of, a terror attack, that's what people immediately go to. And what's bothersome to me is that the media perpetuated this idea that Islam, that the religion could be responsible. And so it's important to have those discussions when we're, making sure that we're not interchangeably using those terms. It's difficult to have those discussions without the experience. And I was lucky enough to be able to travel and go to Iran and see different cultures and see the world from a different perspective. Not everybody has that. And I have to say that there just aren't enough of us representative in the media to tell that story. And so I often hear like Islam and terrorism used interchangeably. And it's just something that we have to change with dialogue and discussion in our newsrooms. And luckily we're able to have that in mind, but I can't speak for elsewhere, but the more of us, the more diverse our newsrooms are, the better off we all are.
So in other words, it sounds like an easy bias to jump to.
Mm-hmm. Bob, let me add something here. Is I think that during 9/11, I was in New York City. I had just finished working with MSNBC and I was at NYU and I lived in the city. So the effects of 9/11 were immediate for me. And days later, actually the day of, when we realized that it was Osama bin Laden network, and I had always researched and worked on Afghanistan, and I knew his network was based there. So for us as Afghan-Americans, we knew that would be where the blame would be laid. As a newsmaker, as a journalist at the time, and I was at the NYU School of Journalism at that time, and had just finished working at MSNBC News, the scenes of 9/11 were dramatic. The exodus out of New York City was incredible. It brought back memories of so many different wars all over the world that I had seen photographs of, and masses of people just fleeing a war zone. So those are forever burned in my mind, those images. And also, what it revealed was that the US media, particularly, I think international media to a degree, but US media had very little understanding of Muslim Americans' lives. And I think that that was one of the biggest things that 9/11 revealed, was that US history, US schools didn't teach about Muslim American communities. And what it also revealed that US media saw Muslim Americans as a monolith, as one large group, which it doesn't. Just like Hispanic Americans or Latin Americans are not a monolith. They all come from different countries. Muslim Americans come from different countries, have different cultures, have variations of languages. And so that was a point for US media to be introspective and say how little we understand. And I have to say that Muslim American journalists were tokenized in newsrooms. They were left with the burden of explaining a very big community. They were left with the burden of carrying their identity when in the sense of identity politics. So it brought up a lot. It helped surface quite a few issues within news media in the US.
So it's deeply embedded in our culture and it's perpetuated through generations. Keanu, tell everybody about the story at Syracuse. Keanu got his master's degree at Syracuse before he went to ESPN. And you told me a story about a classmate. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I had a classmate who was actually is a pretty good friend of mine. And so we were just talking in class one day. It was a time, I think, where it was 2019. So something happened between the Iran and US where tensions were a little bit more heightened than normal. And there was a story running up on the TV in our newsroom about it. And I just overheard from my ear, just hearing someone go, why don't we just bomb Iran? Just bomb them. Let's get it over with. These guys are so annoying. We have to deal with their BS every single day. Let's just do it. And I overheard that and turned to him and I was like, listen, man, like, I have family there, right? Like, I've been there. I have met my family there. Like, there's plenty of innocent people there. And I think this also goes off the conversation we were just having, where I think people, when they see Middle Eastern cultures and Western media, and specifically American media, you see the anti-America protests, you see the anti-America rhetoric. But what people don't understand is that is honestly a minority in a lot of those regions. I'm talking about Iran specifically. You see Iran, you hear the Down with America protests and everything, and it's so blasted out there by the media to perpetuate these stereotypes. But I don't think what people understand is a lot of the people there do want to come to America. Like, they love America and the idea of being there. My cousins would love to be here compared to over there any day of the week. But that's what people don't understand. I feel like we as journalists need to do a better job of kind of bridging that connect and saying, listen, the people over there aren't anti-America. Just because the governments don't get along with each other doesn't mean the people don't have, don't feel a certain way towards America. They don't feel that way that the government feels. Like, they want to be here. They love the idea of democracy and freedom. And so if we can kind of stop perpetuating those false stereotypes by showing these types of images and kind of enforcing those stereotypes, I think we'd be in a better place.
Again, stereotypes at the core of all of this. I see Omar shaking his head, but I want to go back to Zia real quick and say, Zia, from the European and Asian perspective, do you see the media trying to stop that type of thinking or showcasing that type of behavior, trying to, if I may use the term, normalize Muslims and people from the Middle East like any other human being on the planet?
Well, that also depends on the media platforms. For example, in the Europe, there are several types of media. Some media, they're really anti-immigrants. They're really anti-Muslims. They're anti-everybody, just not to themselves. But there are open media, independent media that, which I see after the crisis of Syrian refugees and the crisis of Afghan refugees. They are portraying the Muslim community in a way that this should be accepted for the for the globe, and they're helping. They're making case studies of the refugee families, of the Muslim families. They are giving floor for them to raise their voice. But when I speak about this stereotyping, let's also come to the realities of our own communities. So this is not actually the West. They're taking the Muslim images in a different way. But when it comes to also some Muslim communities, you see that on the other hand, journalists are also treating not in a proper way, and they see journalists as the spies, and they see journalists as their enemies. They don't give the right information for the journalists. For example, nowadays we see that the Taliban in Afghanistan, they're treating journalists, they're arresting journalists and making a lot of violations against journalists. So, in generally speaking, I think, Bob, it's a long way to change this image, and that long way should be shortened first of all by the Muslim journalists, and they have to take the creativity, and they have to also, on the other hand, explore the diversity. I'm also calling on the Muslim media as well in the world, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Iraq, in other countries, that they also have to be very give acceptance to the other religions, to the other cultures, to the other ethnicities. So it should be a two-way of supporting each other and giving floor in order to make a peaceful image of all the human being in the globe.
Very well said. And I want to drop in a personal note about a colleague that I wanted to get for this program, but he's traveling internationally and was unavailable to do this this time, but he wants to come back in the future. And one of the reasons why I wanted him on the program is that I had a sense that he was angry. He was angry as a television journalist here in the United States, American born, by the way, but has family in the Middle East. He feels that as a reporter, sometimes he will pitch a story in the newsroom that he knows the community that he belongs to would connect with, would find it valuable, or would just tell the story of Ramadan in a way that humanizes it, making it more personable, more understanding. And he says sometimes it just seems like the news producers and the news operations in America just, they don't want to hear all that. You know, we've got breaking news we got to cover. We'll try to get back to that later. This notion of being put off because that story is not hot enough. All of you, talk to me about that.
Yeah, Bob, I can chime in here a little bit about that. I know us speaking about having lived experiences, you know, me being a Latino male, I understand a lot what everybody here on the panel is talking about, you know, portraying an image about a certain group is a huge challenge, especially in the newsroom, because like you mentioned, you know, newsrooms have their own ways of picking stories, what's going to be on the breaking news. And let's say like myself, who I have gone to certain places around the world to get that firsthand experience, to know what's actually happening on the ground, then to be able to come back into the newsroom and pitch it, or let's have discussion in a way where it may be newsworthy. I think that's another challenge that maybe a lot of us tend to forget is the whole, I guess, politics about a newsroom and what makes, you know, what makes us, you know, a news report in the rundown at the 5 o'clock or the 6 o'clock, all that stuff, you know, it's super sometimes out of most of our hands, of actual journalists who are at the streets, getting the interview, talking to politicians. Sometimes that is very much out of our hands. It has to be almost, you know, what's going to do good on TV, what's going to sell. And I think that's always a challenge as journalists. We always, I mean, I'm sure a lot of us have had this experience where we got to be able to, you know, pitch out some good story for that story to actually, you know, be the story that we get, you know, assigned to that day. So I find that that's another huge challenge, right? How can we make it so it could make TV or it could be published for everybody to understand?
And you said the magic words. You said politics in the newsroom. Go ahead, Halima.
I was going to add to I think Omar makes some fantastic points in that the editorial control is not always in the hands of the journalist in the field. And I think he makes some great points about that. In addition to that, I wanted to point out something related to the previous question as well, is The television media and what Omar is saying, in its desire and its need for urgency and to be first, oftentimes undermines the communities that it's reporting on. I'll give the example of just last month, actually in February at the end, when the Ukraine war was starting. We had an international correspondent for CBS News on national news. He's the international correspondent, I think, Charlie Deagada, who actually was reporting from Ukraine and said, this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen. That was on live TV. And what that did is it dehumanized the Afghans, the Iraqis, and even though he didn't talk about Syrians, but it dehumanized people in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. What do all these countries have in common? Muslim majority countries, countries that are in war. And if people trace back their wars are caused oftentimes by colonial or Western imperialism. And to use the term are relatively civilized in the context of Ukraine basically dehumanizes the Afghans and the Iraqis and says that they are not civilized, when Iraq was the cradle of civilization. And Afghanistan's history far exceeds these Western countries. But this is one example of how media continue to dehumanize Muslim Middle Eastern populations.
Go right ahead, folks.
I think one of the big problems in media and newsrooms, like when we're presenting these people and these backgrounds, I think it's that constant battle between ratings and like what's the best story. Because there's times, and I've been in plenty of newsrooms, where we're not going to necessarily run the best story, maybe the story that has the best content in it, that kind of has the best storytelling in it. We're going to tell the story that gets the most eyeballs on the screen, gets as many people on the screen. I understand at the end of the day, it's the ads, it's the revenue that comes in that keeps our newsrooms functioning. I understand the desire to get there, but I think we need to find that balance, and it's going to be really difficult. But we have to find that balance between, yes, ratings are king. We need to get our ratings, but also we need to put some relevant stories out there. And I feel like sometimes you just get too comfortable running the same stories that we know are going to get the eyeballs. And I think we need to start running the stories that educate people more, that people understand certain backgrounds better, because how are people ever going to learn if we just keep showing, Donald Trump on the screen all day, every single day when he's not president anymore? Just because he's a polarizing figure and he brings eyeballs, a lot of people are like, all right, we got to throw him on the screen. That's our lead story in the A's. Where I think it's just better. And we have to find that balance. And I don't have the answer right now, but I think we need to work towards that answer, balancing the ratings and the revenue and the business part of the industry and the storytelling aspect of the industry.
I think we can...
Go ahead.
We can also do it. Of course, that's an experience. Everybody has it. And however, I didn't have the opportunity to work in an environmental newsroom context. But currently, I'm still doing with my Persian speaking colleagues from Iran and Afghanistan and running the radio and the TV station. But what I could say, based on my background and experiences from other organizations, from non-media organizations, is that one has to really represent himself. One has to give the representation of his culture and his religions and his background. And by doing great and by giving a sense of trust, a sense of skills. And when we talk about the Middle East or Muslims or Central Asian journalists or any other individuals, that doesn't mean that they are not having talent and power and capacity. But this is the perception that some people have it in the West. And that perception has to be changed by doing something good, by doing something extraordinary. We have the examples in our panel now. Look at Halima Kazem. She's a role model for so many Afghan journalists. And I also know other journalists from Afghanistan and Iran. They're the role models. They're challenging other Western journalists with their skills, with their talents. So I think this is also an individual responsibility that we have to change the image. And there are, of course, situations that you're not listened, you're not understood, you're ignored totally, but that takes time to change it. I have the same experience of being a migrant in Germany. Of course, there were cases which I was ignored, which I was not accepted due to the color of my hair, due to the background of my religion or the country of origin. But when I managed to express my skills, my talent, and my background, and that perception was totally changed. So this is my suggestions for the young journalists working now in the newsrooms.
Good advice. And those key words, not being accepted, you don't feel that you were accepted. Nazy, I know we've had those experiences as young journalists, and I wonder sometimes, and this is me thinking out loud, feel free to disagree with me, folks. I do understand stations are hiring people as executives or producers specialized in diversity news content to make more news operations aware of how to cover their communities. But I also wonder, are they biased, or do you really need somebody as a gate control person to tell you what to cover? Nazy, what are your thoughts?
Such a loaded question. I haven't had the experience of being hired or let go because I'm, or promoted or not promoted. I haven't had an experience that way in which my cultural identity has impacted my career that way. I've been fortunate, and I feel very privileged to be in the position that I'm in. But I do agree that we need more opportunity to share more about our Muslim communities and our cultures in the news. And it's the same problem that I don't have a solution for, that I always go back to. It's like, are people going to be interested about this in our community? How does me telling this story serve the community? And so I find little ways, like when I'm anchoring, to interject, like, with the weather, with our meteorologist, today's, first day of spring, we're Persian New Year. And I put little tidbits of culture that I like to share, so that people can get to see the positive side of what it is to learn about my Iranian culture, the good things, because I think the only way that we're going to change the narrative about Muslims or Middle Eastern and all of our different cultures is to share the positive. We see so much of the negative just dominated in the media, and it's so accepted. And then the fact that and I'm going away from your question, but it's so accepted to use the term, like, the people associate terrorism with Islam, but they don't associate, white nationalists or the KKK with Christians and Christianity. How some of it is so accepted to be spoken about this way, and how it would be people would be outraged if we spoke about it on the other end. I don't know what the solution is for that. I wish I had a solution to that problem. My mom is Christian, my dad is Muslim, and I grew up in a household where, everyone's ideas and thoughts were accepted. But we just, I don't know. I don't have the answers. I think just dialogue and sharing our personal experiences is where we have to start.
Well, it certainly starts the process. It opens up our minds to these realities. I'll share one personally. I belong to a variety of cultural groups, as I mentioned, and when you're LGBTQI and you're Roman Catholic, I sometimes hear comments in the community from my friends who are gay and lesbian, well, how could you be a part of a church that brought about the Crusades and are constantly telling you that you're evil and you're going to hell? So I can understand that rub, that challenge. And I remember when I tried to cover those communities, I would try to be sensitive to the words that we use in describing what's happening in that community and why it's news. And I'll ask the entire group, do you worry about the words sometimes? You're shaking your head, Omar. We worry about the words. Why?
Yeah, at least for me, I think I mentioned to you, Bob, before when we were speaking, I remember so vividly in my first job where I was kind of asked by somebody, hey, are you sure you want to say your last name like that? So my last name is pronounced Perez because there's an accent on the first E. And, it really drew me back because language, especially in our, industry, is so important. And like Halima mentioned, right, even somebody who, let's say, is a CNN international correspondent saying, words carry a huge, huge meaning. And so at least, myself being Latino, it carries the same weight. I want someone to acknowledge, what my culture, my identity, how you say my last name. And I know I'm kind of going back to the previous question, but I think a lot of the challenge also lies in where in the world we are at. I couldn't say or report on the same things that are happening in Bakersfield that are happening here in the Bay Area, but I do definitely believe that our words have huge, huge meaning. And if anything, it's always a constant struggle. I mean, I know, being on TV, you always have that pressure of knowing exactly what you want to say, saying it right, because there's always going to be somebody out there, coming at your head saying that, you mispronounced something or you didn't say something correct. But I definitely believe it's a huge challenge for us.
Very good. Other thoughts?
I agree. And I think that if I could point to one word, which is fundamentalist or fundamentalism, and it's become obviously post 9/11 synonymous with Islam, but my issue with it is a lot of people don't read history, don't know history, and that is true in the United States as well. And in this context, fundamentalism is actually tied to early 20th century Protestant Christian movement and sect, and misunderstood these days to always refer to Islam. And so these histories are not spoken about, and the words, we are as journalists wordsmiths, right? We have to be very careful on how we apply words and use them, and not knowing those histories actually makes that quite a big problem for us.
Very good. And Ferozpur, we have a question from one of our board members about terminology itself. What would you suggest are terms that are correct and work and should be used in the media, as opposed to, let's stop using these other terms? What would you say from your perspective there?
Well, first of all, we should look into the reactions of the Muslim communities when you use a word in the context. For example, as Halima mentioned, the fundamentalism or the fundamentalists or the jihadis or the Muslim terrorists, or however. These are the common words that are currently being used in the last 20 years by the Western media, but one has to look to the reaction of the people, how people are welcoming them or rejecting them. When you call, for example, a Muslim terrorist, that's like blaming an entire community of Muslims. Yes, there are terrorists in the Muslim communities, and those were in other non-Muslim communities as well. So we have to think about the definition. The definition of terrorism, the definition of any other phenomena is very contextual, I think. That contextuality is different from the country of my origin and the country of yours, or where I see it in one way and you have to see it in the other way. I think it's very much important because the Muslim communities, or most of them, are very conservative. So when you are covering the conservative community, and you have to be very cautious with the literature that you use, with the words that you use, and the way that you shape and you represent the stories. I would like to give you, for example, an example. If you want to travel to a Muslim community, if you want to really get the trust of your Muslim host, it's better you wear the same that they wear. You, for example, greet the same that they greet. And if you, for example, not respect the culture, that's the same in the way if I come to United States and I don't respect the culture of diversity, of the sexual diversity, or any other, for example, the religious independency and the freedom of speech, I see very nonsense, for example, if I come to the United States and not respecting this diversity. And when you expect me to respect this diversity, and that should be also on the opposite way.
It should be mutually extended to everyone. Good point. And you made me think, and let me bring Keanu back in the conversation. We talked a little bit about this in class once, about the women wearing the hijab and how you approach women and men differently in certain cultural communities. But what he just said, what Zia just said, was if we know how to act at a Thanksgiving dinner table and not to cause an uproar, an explosion by triggering Uncle Sam or Uncle Bob or Ellis, then why can't Americans understand the notion of be respectful of these cultures? Now, the question for you, Keanu, is you're now in a major network, you've got that wonderful job at ESPN, but you want to be able to do what we all had to do, climb the ladder of success, pay your dues, work the long hours, show them that you're good, and he is real good. But once you do, what do you expect him to do in terms of listening to you?
Oof, great question, Bob. I mean, everyone wants to be heard at the end of the day. I think whether you're working in media, whether you're working in any industry, any job, you want to be heard, you want to be listened to. So it is frustrating when, you know, you're pitching ideas, you're bringing a lot of ideas to the table and you feel like you're not being heard. And, you know, that can affect you, I think, mentally, and it can be very frustrating. And you won't bring, you know, that 100% effort to the job. And I think, for me at least, I think when it comes to me pitching ideas in the past, I would say, one, my age, being young, not being in the industry as long as some of the other producers there. And then my background when it comes to certain stories, I'd say. So it's important to listen to everybody, no matter if they're 18 years old, they're just a new producer on the staff, or, you know, they're much older in their 70s, they're about to retire next year. I think it doesn't really, you have to listen. I think listening and being heard is very important, because the second someone doesn't feel like they're being heard, whether producer is not being heard, whether anybody on the crew isn't being heard, I think that's when issues arise. That's when you don't get people's best foot forward, and you don't get to hear all these different viewpoints that we've been talking about, you know, why it's so beneficial to have such a wide and diverse newsroom. But if no one's listening, you know, it's going to bring a lot of more problems than the ones you're trying to solve.
We all want to be heard. We want to be listened to. With that end, I'm going to use that as a cue to say, if we have any questions from our audience, if you want to send those to us now, that would be good. We're coming up on a time when we'd like to hear from the viewers that are watching this program as we transition into our final comment, which is about the whole idea of diversity. I have something from Gasia that she wants to add in just a moment. But before we get to Gasia, I want the entire group to talk to the Academy and its membership and people watching on YouTube and Facebook. Why is it important for the broadcast industry to understand and take diversity, inclusion seriously? Why? Got them thinking. I can see it on their faces.
I can start off, no worries. Well, I mean, at least from my experience, although, you know, I'm come from a Latino background, in my experiences, amongst everything that we've talked about here today, I took it upon myself to learn about a different culture. And for me, the Middle Eastern, you know, was very much a lot like we spoke about today. It was a lot of preconceptions, a lot of, untruthful things. And when I went abroad, I really realized, you know, that, you know, other cultures share a lot of the same similarities, the same customs as me. And so I believe it's important to have these conversations of diversity in newsrooms, specifically because we can share our lived experiences. And I truly, truly believe, as much different people make us out to be, from Latinos to, you know, Middle Eastern, we are much, much more alike. And I truly believe if we're able to share our lived experiences, I feel like we're going to be able to touch and really reach a much broader audience to really understand that, you know, we're much more alike. And I understand that when we don't understand something, you know, we have our preconceptions, but, you know, I think a lot of people will be surprised to know that we are much more alike than different.
Very good point. And I think here's where I'll bring in Gasia. When we were talking, she said, when it comes to demonstrating a true appreciation of diversity in television journalism, to help make better connections with our audiences, Gasia Mikaelian says, because communities grow and change constantly, we should always see our goals as never-ending challenges.
First of all, whenever we have discussions about diversity in the newsroom, I think the first thing that we're all doing is admitting that we're not there. Because sometimes you can make a little improvement or take a little step forward and think, okay, great, we did it. We're better now, right? But just because you're better doesn't mean that you're there yet. So it's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process. And that means we all have to listen, we have to be open to it, and we have to allow these cultural identities that are locked in people's brains to evolve and to grow. But we can't tell people what to do. We can't tell them how to think. So let me go to my professor. Halima, how did I try to teach you to think for yourself?
So what I think about diversity in newsrooms is true diversity. That means not requiring people who come in with these, as Omar excellently articulates, with these different lived experiences to have to conform to certain norms within the newsroom, that agreeing and accepting that certain norms in newsrooms have to change, identifying those and changing those, not necessarily bringing in diverse faces, but to fit certain molds and norms. That is, I think, where true change occurs.
Exactly. What other thoughts you might have? Nazy?
Yeah, I mean, I really like what you just said there. And I think that we are so good as journalists at getting out there and holding the powerful accountable and asking hard questions and asking the follow-up hard question and not letting them get out of it. But then what about us? We have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to ask the hard questions of ourselves and really internally get in there, because we all have some sort of implicit bias that it's critical for me that I have awareness so that the words that are coming out of my mouth and going onto paper and being disseminated to thousands of people are sensitive to the circumstance and the story that I'm telling, and they advance it in a fair and balanced way. When I see stuff, sometimes I'll see it even like in an Associated Press article, and then everybody blasts it out, and every news station has it. And that the one way that something could be phrased in a way that has just some judgment to it, or portrays, the Muslim community and or communities, I would like to say, in a bad light, and then it just, people without thinking just blast it out in a copy paste. And that's such a powerful position to be in. We, if we're powerful, have to hold ourselves accountable the way that we would hold other powerful people accountable.
Excellent.
Just one thing, Bob, is let's look across local TV stations across America and national. How many Muslim women do we have on air that wear a headscarf? I'm not saying that every station should have one, but I don't think I have seen one in a very long time. And that is because it's outside the norms of television news. You can have Muslim American reporters, but one that wears a scarf is still outside the norm. That is what I'm talking about true change within these norms.
Excellent point. Not just about... Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add regarding this diversity. Diversity is, I think, it's the strength and point of the all human being. Because when we talk about diversity, it's the diversity of the religious, the culture, the color, and all the backgrounds. And we are not about to choose those diversity. That comes as a heritage or from the parents or naturally. So when we have this diversity in the newsroom, like we have that in the community or in the world in a bigger, wider picture. So this is the strength and this is the positivity, and we have to accept this one. I would like to just give an example of the Nowruz celebration, which is celebrated among all the Central Asian and some Middle East countries, including Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. So now I see that in some American TV stations, they are to some extent, they're celebrating the Nowruz celebration, which is the beginning of the first year of the solar year. So that has to be expanded, that has to be continued in order to accept the diversity. And in a Afghanistan context, I wanted to say an example that we have always an argument in between the word of Pohantun and Danishgah, that both means university, but in Pashto we say Pohantun, but in Persian or in Farsi we call it Danishgah. So all the journalists during this 20 years, they had a sense of struggling with the using of this word among themselves in the newsrooms, because they were coming from different diversity and coming from different background, ethnicity. But some accepted that they have to use a word of university or the equivalent word of Danishgah or Pohantun instead of each other. But some have been really resistance against that and writing so many harsh statements on the social media, and some have been even fired because of using only one word in the media of Danishgah in the state of Pohantun. So it's not only in America, Bob. I think it's in every community, in every country where we're running the news agencies and the televisions. But I think diversity is always is difficult to accept it in a way which it is. But I see it's a positive point. We're all diverse. And
an asset. That's the key thing to remember. It's not just something that we have to do. It's something we enjoy doing, and it's part of the fabric of our lives to include people and enjoy learning from each other. As we get close to wrapping up, I'm looking for any questions from our audience, and I'd also would ask, do you have any questions, panelists, for each other?
The one day none of us have questions.
I just wanted to ask a question. Have you ever heard of the celebration of Nowruz in your TV channels, in your media industries, or not?
Not me.
Not you. So.
Me, yes, because I put it out there.
No, in the Bay Area, we have it.
That has to be advocated, I think, Bob.
Amen. Yes.
You know, Ferozpur, we should tell CNN and MSNBC and all the other international networks, this guy's in Germany. You might want to bring him over here and teach us a few things.
Yes.
Other thoughts from anyone else? Then I'm curious, as we move forward, what would help in terms of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences to send out whatever messaging through social media or through our websites? What could we do to educate about language and culture and diversity?
I think that a handbook or a television handbook on certain terms that are related to Middle Eastern or Muslim communities for reporting, for new reporters, for the newsroom would be essential, and also some educational material on histories of these communities would be important.
Very good. Never stop learning. It's the basic concept. What else?
I think that's the $1 million question right there, right? It's just diversity. We have to bring diverse newsrooms, and we have to bring people of different backgrounds. And I think one thing that irks me the most, like the number one thing you hear when someone says we need to have more diverse hires, the number one opposition argument you hear is, well, you should just hire the best guy for the job. It should be just the best guy for the job. Well, listen, there's a bunch of best guys for the job. There's a lot of people who are the best guy for the job, and a lot of people are qualified to do this job. What you should bring in is people who bring as many viewpoints as possible, with as many cultural experiences as possible, to bring into your newsroom. So when you have all these different backgrounds, you won't have these editorial slip-ups. You won't have things that go on air that got blasted on Twitter, like look at this news organization being so insensitive to this group. So that's the $1 million question, right? We have to bring in more diverse hires. And just I hate it when people say it's just the best guy for the job. It shouldn't be by your skin color, your background. There's so many people that are qualified for the job. We need to break those norms. For example, what Halima was talking about, we have to break those norms, and we have to really attack this issue head on.
Very well said. Thank you, Keanu. I know, Halima, you may have to run very quickly. Do you have any final thoughts?
Thank you for bringing this to an audience. And there's a lot to be worked out, but I'm so honored to be with everyone today.
Well, we hope you'll come back and be a part of all of this. Anybody else want to offer anything else before we wrap up?
Just grateful for the discussion, Bob. Thank you for opening this channel and giving us an opportunity to share our experiences.
Very good. My pleasure to do so. And those of you who are my former students, I told you I'd get you back on the air with me someday.
You did. Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, guys, thank you.
I'll just ask my producer and director, are there any other questions from the audience? All right, very good. Well, I hope to follow up with this in a creative way, and I welcome your input. I hope all of you will continue to stay in touch, become members of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and most of all, keep letting us know what we're not doing quite right. That's the only way to tweak it and make it better. Thank you all very much for being part of this today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, I also want to thank the Academy president, Randy Forsman, for directing, and for the incredible editing and producing by Steve Slisky, that wonderful open that we put together every week. That's him doing his thing, and I really appreciate that. I promise that looking ahead, during the months of April and May, we hope to assemble more groups and pre-record at least 3 more special focus sessions before the summertime. They would include individual programs involving Asian and Asian American broadcast journalists, who we invite to share their experiences and tell how the recent Asian hate crimes have affected them and their colleagues. Another program I'd like to focus on is for Latinos and Hispanics in journalism, the views, the concerns, the life experiences in broadcasting. And of course, a third panel, probably we would run in June to coincide with Gay Pride celebrations. We'd like to hear and talk about the history of LGBTQ broadcast professionals and career challenges and now opportunities for those working in front of the camera and behind the camera. So you see my email address there. Feel free to get in touch with me if you're interested or you want to be nominated or want to nominate someone else for any of those sessions. And most of all, use this email to contact me with suggestions, ideas for the future, or questions that should be included in some of these programs. And by the end of the year, I also hope we can do a program on disability concerns, as well as a session that welcomes the majority population of white people in professional broadcasting. Yes, everyone should have a chance to open up and get real. Final thoughts, please remember this new NATAS San Francisco NorCal chapter of diversity was created to inform and educate about all sensitive cultural experiences in a safe space for opening eyes, minds, and hearts among colleagues and decision makers in broadcasting. And yes, someday soon, I hope we'll be able to do this in person, the old-fashioned way, with a live audience. Thanks to 37 years of doing this on a college campus, I can tell you, in person, it can be even more powerful. The focus will always be on truth-telling, is what we do in broadcasting, and people know that. They've come to rely upon it over decades. Now, by sharing our individual cultural truths and experiences, we truly make a difference in our profession and enable our colleagues to be heard, understood, and included in the decision-making process that makes better connections with our communities. Okay, I'll stop talking now and say it's been a pleasure to host this today. And on behalf of the Board of Governors, from Ramadan Mubarak, have a blessed Ramadan. And for all the others in the audience, happy Passover, happy Easter this month of April. And may every week of this month bring you joy and happiness to all the cultural families of humanity. Thank you all for being here today. Take good care. We'll see you next time.